Hello, chess friends, and welcome to Jozarov's chess channel, and welcome to the second day of the chess.com Speed Chess Championship in 2020. Today's exciting match game was, of course, the match game between the world champion Magnus Carlsen and Parham Maghsoodloo. Parham Maghsoodloo, really an interesting player. He is a top grandmaster from Iran, and he became in 2018 the world's youth chess champion. It's also, I think, a great accomplishment. Among other things, he became also twice the champion of Iran. So really an interesting player, and really deserves his place in this tournament. But today he faced really the best, the world champion Magnus Carlsen. So at the end of the video, I'm going to reveal you also, of course, the result of their match game. But so far, let's now analyze first the game. As I mentioned, the concept is like this. First, we have this 10 games of 5+1, then 10 games of 3+1, and then 10 games of 1+1. So I decided to show really an interesting game because many really interesting games were played. I really had my troubles to decide which I'm going to analyze and show you. I decided to show you an accelerated London system by Magnus Carlsen with its common 150 or with its common flank attack. It's really an interesting game. So d4 played by Magnus. We have knight to f6 by Parham, bishop to f4. Now this accelerated London system, and I've started the series on my YouTube chess channel. If you're familiar maybe more with my YouTube chess channel, the London system. So far I've covered 12 videos of this very nice opening from white's perspective, so you can maybe check it out and have a nice preparation as white. Bishop to f4, g6, and now knight to c3 played by Magnus, and now comes bishop to g7. Here e4 played by Magnus, because Parham didn't play maybe the most aggressive move. Here it would be something like d5, then we would play something like knight to f3, e3, maybe h4, h5, the so-called berry attack. In the game, Parham tried bishop to g7, e4, and even in this particular point, I think the best way here is to proceed simply with d5. So after maybe knight to b5, it is protectable with knight to a6, but after potential e takes d5, knight takes d5 can be played, and here I think white doesn't have so much advantages. First of all, you have to protect your d4 pawn, so I think it is playable for black. But d6 is also okay. It's not a problem. It's a normal King's Indian structure, but what I don't like about this move, because in most of the times of the King's Indian or modern defense, perch defense setups, you want to create a pawn breakthrough with the move e5, and with its accelerated setup that Magnus has built here, you have already troubles to do that, because the bishop is of course covering the d5 square, the d4 pawn is covering that. Then we can also maneuver our knight here to f3, and again we'll have a perfect protection of the e5. So the battle, I think if black goes for the battle around the e5 square, it will be lost. So that's why I think this d5 idea is much more aggressive. So here queen to d2, you see Magnus builds this 150 attack setup. It's really an aggressive setup, similar to the Yugoslav attack. If you're familiar maybe with the Yugoslav attack against the Dragon Sicilian, where we're waiting black to castle on the king side, then we're trading off the dark square bishop and try a flank attack h4, h5, and then sneak in with the queen, create a rook and a queen battery on the h file, and deliver checkmate. That's the main strategy. Not many games are really ended with this checkmate on the h file, but that's really the main strategy of whites. Black strategy is to counterattack with a6, b5 moves here on the queen side. In the game, knight to c6 played by Parham. This is a provocative move because he wants, basically, he's dividing now white to play the move d5 to expose himself a little bit, because the pawn structure in the center is still flexible. Here, when you play the move here, potential d5 move, then it's suddenly static. We can cement our knight on e5 and build simply a very nice and firm setup here around the square. So that's why Magnus doesn't go for it. He plays simply queenside castling, plays in this fast developing style, and now castling also played by Parham, and now bishop to h6. The common idea, as I said, it's similar, as I said, to the Yugoslav attack. Now we're attacking simply the fianchetto, because among many things, the bishop on g7 is also good attacking piece, because we are trying, of course, to create our flank attack on the queen side. The kings are on opposite sides, so it means we should really attack our opponent's king as fast as we can. But the main problem about black is when we really trade off the dark square bishops, then you don't have so many defenders in front of the king. So we want to get rid of the key defender, but also of the key attacker in black's position. It's of course the dark square bishop. So here e5, here bishop takes g7, king to g7, and now knight to e2. Here, if you ask yourself what happens if you play d5, from a strategical point of view, it's, I think, not so good, because first of all we can play the move knight to e7 or knight to d4, and what we can notice that many pawns are on light squares here. That's the main problem, I think, of whites here after potential d5. It's not that I'm saying that after the move d5 you will lose the game, but from the common strategy ideas, I think this d5 is creating, first of all, again, a blocked pawn structure in the center. These pawns are immobile here in the center, and you have really light square bishop, and you have troubles to activate this bishop. So I think this light square bishop of blacks in the potential endgame would be much stronger. So that's why here Magnus played knight to e2. Knight to f3, you see, can be also positional mistake, because then you meet this idea bishop to g4, pinning on the rook, and really create this dynamics around the square e5 and d4. So that's why here knight from g to e2, because after bishop to g4 we can meet it with this very nice f3 move. So e takes d4, knight to d4, we have bishop to d7, and now f3. Now we have really a similar idea. It's similar really to the Yugoslav attack of the Dragon Sicilian. The main difference now here is that in the Sicilian we're trading off the c pawn. Now in the Spurs defense or modern defense setups we're trading off the e pawn, but the main strategy is still there, as I said, the g4 h4 flank attack. So a6, black wants to create also flank attack on the queen side as fast as he can. Now g4, and now rook to e8. We have h4, and now h5. Very important move to stop a little bit white progress on the king side, but here g5 kicks away the knight, and now knight to g8. This knight is passive, although it's a good defensive piece to have in front of the king, because it protects, of course, the dark squares. Here the square f6 and the square h6, you don't have anymore the dark square bishop, so you could use really nice defensive piece. But the evaluation is much better here already for white, because we have, first of all, the space advantage on the 5th rank. We're, I think, a little bit faster when these kings are on opposite sides. You always evaluate your position. Are we fast enough to attack our opponent's king? And I think white is much faster, because black didn't even counterplay here with the potential b5 move. So here Magnus centralized the knight to d5, king to h7, and now king to b1. Also a natural idea to improve the position of the king. We have knight to d4, queen to d4, and now bishop to e6. Here you could also try maybe finally the move rook to b8, finally b5, b4, maybe then afterwards a5, a4, then really try to split the pawn structure in front of white's king, and maybe create some dangerous attacks on the b file. But here bishop to e6 is a little bit passive, because Magnus has now the opportunity to simply push the pawn further. If you try bishop takes d5 to get rid of this very nice knight, then queen to d5 will happen, and something like queen to e7 still can be met with f5. We have really advanced our pawn, and now there is really a great positional threat to play the move f6. If we manage to do that, if we get our pawn to f6, you see this knight is trapped through the whole game. The knight will stay till the end of the game on this very weird square on g8. So that's why g takes f5 doesn't help you out, because you're creating further weaknesses in front of the king. We can recapture with the pawn, we can recapture also with the queen, so it's a really lost game then afterwards for black. So that's why taking out the knight so far is not possible. Here c6, knight to e3, and now we have c5. Queen to d6 doesn't bring you so much, because black doesn't have to trade off the queens. Black can go into queen to a5 ideas, and then rook from a to d8, because we would have really nice powerful control of the d8, and then the queen has to move, and we have also some tactical threats on a2. So that's why Magnus doesn't fall for this. Of course, he knows what kind of a tactic can happen after potential c5. So d6, so far it's not possible to take it, but as a long-term plan, if we maybe secure the king somehow, if we protect our king further, if we secure maybe rook connection, then maybe the d6 could be again a new weakness, and we can take it out and go maybe into favorable endgame with one pawn up. So queen to d2, Magnus retreats, knight to e7, now f5. Taking again is not so good here. He takes f5 again. We will simply find a way to target this square, this weak pawn on h5 somehow. So splitting the pawns is not an option here. So that's why bishop to c8. And now it's already really a bad game because Magnus plays simply an aggressive move. Bishop to c4. We have rook to f8 and now rook to f1, activating the pieces. And that's really the beauty of chess, I think, when you create this so-called attacking setup. I think we have created, after remove here, rook to f1, a great setup. The queen is really on a great square, you know. Here, bishop very active. The knight is centralized. The rook and the queen building this battery. So I think all of Magnus Carlsen pieces are on ideal squares. They have now really a great activity. And whenever you feel that you have such a great activity, it's time to strike back with some tactics. So here b5 was played, and pause the video and try to find now the best next move for Magnus Carlsen. As usual, we say test your might in chess. So test your might and find your really a nice tactic that Magnus Carlsen, of course. So there are many good moves, I think, here for Magnus, but he found really, I think, the most attractive one in the game. Magnus, of course, didn't retreat with the bishop. He tried bishop takes f7. Great tactic by Magnus. Rook to f7, and now f takes g6, opening the f file. You have to take with the king. Taking with the knight is not an option. You lose the rook on f7, so that's why king to g6. Rook takes f7, king to f7, queen to f2, king to g8, and now Magnus realized this idea. Great tactic. He realized that he can sneak in with the queen. Now we can push this pawn further. We can create a rook and queen battery again on the f file. Because of this passive move, bishop to c8, when black retreated, we have lost really the connection between the rook and the queen. That's the main issue here. You cannot do anything. It's a lost game here. Queen to f8, queen takes d6, bishop to g4. It's a little bit too late because rook to f1, queen to d8, and now queen to h6, bishop to h3, and now try to pause the video again, try to find again the best next move. It's always like this. When you get attacked, the main idea of yours should never be to just retreat. If we retreat, then it's of course bad. Then if we retreat maybe to g1, h1. Whenever we get attacked, we should also always search for counterattacks. And here Magnus plays the move g6, and it's a force now. Checkmate in 4. In this position, black resigns. So what to do if you take, of course, it's a checkmate. You cannot get your pieces into the game. Knight takes g6 doesn't help you out. So again, it's a new checkmate. So whatever you do, white is simply winning. So great games I think we have seen between Magnus and Parham, and Parham lost the match game. He got only 5 points. Magnus Carlsen was playing really incredible. He won so many games in a row. But I was watching really every game of them, and I saw a little bit of some of Stockfish analysis. In some of these games, Parham really had some great games with +3 evaluation that he eventually lost and afterwards. So he played many great games. I think that 5 points that he only got in 30 games against Magnus Carlsen wasn't the objective result. I think at least Parham should have I think maybe 8-9 points. So he had really some winning games that he should have simply won. And okay, this is still Magnus. Of course, we know that Magnus plays till the end, that he is a fighter, even if he has a worse position, that he will find a defensive strategy if you don't maybe play the next best move. So that's why it was, of course, his win today. But as I said, Parham really an interesting player and deserved, as I said, a couple more wins. But unfortunately, he is now out of the tournament, and Magnus moves up into the quarterfinals. So okay, interesting game. I think I'll tomorrow cover maybe 1 or 2 more by Magnus Carlsen, because he was playing really such aggressive mode against Parham. If you want to see more of this, more games of this tournament, I've created now this playlist. So far I've analyzed also the match came between Maxim Vasilyev and Nihal Sarin. Here's the link. And if you want to study this London system as promised, here's also the link of this series that I've started recently, so you can check it out and maybe study your opening from white's perspective. And if you like this content, you can also subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.